Good evening. I'm Father Alexander. This is St. Peter's Hove, and welcome to our 119th step in our walking tour through the Bible. And we're going to be looking at the book of Ezra, which is sort of the third part of the Chronicles, and in particular, the first six chapters of the book of Ezra. Now, what happens in this chapter is the rebuilding of the temple. The exiles have returned, and the exiles rebuild the temple. Okay, that sounds really straightforward, doesn't it? Now, I did say the second book of Chronicles was one of the most dull books in the Bible. The book of Ezra, I find personally absolutely fascinating, even though it's a book that's very rarely read out in church in its entirety. A few bits are read out, but not this bit, not this first section about the rebuilding of the temple. Now, there are two things. Do read it. It's not long, but there are two things that stand out, that leap out on you in the page. The first of them is this, that the temple was only rebuilt in the teeth of very strong opposition. The Jews come back to the land of Judah. They start to rebuild the ruins of Jerusalem. They first of all offer sacrifice on the site of the temple, then they start to rebuild the temple. They've been promised by Cyrus they can rebuild the temple, and Cyrus has told them that he will give help to rebuild the temple. But then the people living in Samaria, those wicked Samaritans, and now you can see the roots of the hatred the Jews had for the Samaritans in the time of Jesus. The wicked Samaritans intervene. They petition the authorities, the king, back in Persia, saying these people are bad people, they've often been rebels and so on. And he looks in the archives and he says, yes, it's true what you say, and stops the temple being built. Then the Jews make a counter petition, and when Darius the First is on the throne, and they say, look, it was Cyrus who allowed us to rebuild this temple, Cyrus who said we'd get all the help we needed to rebuild the temple. And Darius looks in the archives and says, yes, you can rebuild the temple. Nobody is to interfere with you. That's basically it in a nutshell. One of the things that the book of Ezra preserves is the correspondence, which is remarkable, I find. And it's fascinating correspondence to hear those genuine voices of people from, 500 BC, a long time ago. And the fact that this correspondence is genuine, it's not been made up, it's actual real correspondence, it seems to me, is because it's not surprising because we have so much correspondence from the ancient world. The reason we have so much correspondence from the ancient world is because in those days they wrote things on clay tablets which were baked, and clay tablets with their cuneiform script survive. I mean, literally, they can survive thousands of years. And we have vast amounts of clay tablets from the ancient Near East, most of which are intensely boring. They're just sort of things like laundry lists and so on and so forth. And it's a sign, of course, of how sophisticated the Persian Empire was, because the Persian Empire was based on this enormous network of correspondence and so on and so forth. Now it's the various governors and the various secretaries. So they had a civil service and they sent off clay tablets and so on and so forth, and decisions were handed down from on high. So the Jews carefully, cleverly outflank the Samaritans by appealing to the sovereign, and the sovereign gives them what they want. Extraordinary, I find. I find that just incredibly interesting. This sort of politicking that went on 2,500 years ago. Now, there's something else that's remarkable here. There are two other things that are remarkable. The first is Cyrus is the guy, even though he's now dead, who ensures that the temple is rebuilt. Cyrus is not Jewish, but Cyrus seems to have a superstitious reverence for the Jews, because one of those letters says that Cyrus had said that nobody was to interfere with the Jews, nobody was to touch the Jews. Almost like if you did touch the Jews, it would be extraordinary bad luck. And it's in chapter 6. It says, the temple is to be rebuilt as a place of offering sacrifice, and its foundations retained. The height is to be, etc., etc. It's all been laid down. Not only were these people civil servants, they were real civil servants with an eye for detail. The cost is to be met by the royal treasury. Furthermore, the gold and silver articles belonging to the temple of the god, which Nebuchadnezzar took from the temple in Jerusalem, brought to Babylon to be given back and returned to the temple in Jerusalem, each in its proper place, and deposited in the temple of God, each in its proper place. You see the eye for detail. And then it goes on, keep away from there, Jerusalem. Leave the governor of the Jews and the elders of the Jews alone to get on with their work on that temple of God. They are permitted to rebuild the temple of God on that site. And herewith are my instructions to how you will assist them. Leave them alone. Now, it seems to me that Cyrus is the first sort of character we have in the Bible who is a God-fearer, one who fears the God of Israel, doesn't follow the God of Israel, but recognizes the God of Israel is a true God. This reminds me very much of that much maligned, at least by Catholics, man, Oliver Cromwell, who allowed not just toleration for Jews, the first person in this country to do so, but also gave the Jews certain privileges and protected them. This was because he was possibly a biblical fundamentalist. He was bitter in his persecution of Catholics, but he protected the Jews and let them be and forbade other people from persecuting them. The only other people I think at the time who did this were the Dutch Republic, who allowed the Jews perfect freedom. Now, so that is strange. So Cyrus is a rather odd character in this regard. And maybe there are other odd characters like that even today. People who are not Christians, but who are Christian sympathizers and who hold Christianity in awe. The other thing is, what about all these vessels that we're told? Now, the beginning of the book of Ezra gives us this enormous quantity of not just exiles returning, but also the furnishings of the temple that were brought back. The plates, the cups, the crockery. It's not crockery, it's actually bronze. Now, it was all carried off by Nebuchadnezzar and put in his temple as some sort of trophy. Now it is being returned. Why are they so keen on this? Because, I mean, you can always make new things out of bronze, can't you? Now, it's because the temple that's being rebuilt is in continuity with the original temple. It is the second temple, but it's a continuation of the first temple. This is incredibly important, the continuity of the tradition. Now, for example, it does happen occasionally. People say to me, well, why do we have to have two candles on the altar? And I say, well, what do you mean? Why do we have two candles on the altar? We always have two candles on the altar. Yeah, but we don't need to, do we? I said, yes, we do. I'd hate it if we didn't have two candles on the altar. It wouldn't feel right. But then, and that is a gut feeling, but if you try and put that into a way that can be expressed in rational terms, why do we have two candles on the altar? We have two candles on the altar because we've always had two candles on the altar, because it's our tradition, and because we want to be in continuity with the people who've come before us. Now, the Mass, the liturgy of the Church, is obviously got a horizontal dimension. It's going out to our contemporaries, but it's also got a vertical dimension. It's stretching backwards in time to the original Mass in the upper room of the Last Supper. Why does the priest wear a chasuble? Because the priest has always worn a chasuble. That's why. And the chasuble is there to remind us that this priest, who's wearing a chasuble now, is doing exactly what the priest did back in 400 AD, who also wore a chasuble. Once upon a time, I believe, the chasuble was the must-have garment in the Roman Empire. It was just a nice set of clothes. And it was eventually it survived only as a priestly garb, but that priestly garb is there to remind us that the priest in the chasuble today is doing exactly the same thing as the priest in the chasuble 1,800 years ago. That's really important. Everything we do is not made up from scratch. Everything we do, rather, is in continuity what we have received. And it wasn't made up from scratch in the first place. It was received from God. Therefore, by having two candles on the altar, by wearing a chasuble, we are doing what God wants. The person who is behind the temple, the person who caused the temple to be built, is the Lord God himself. The person who causes the Mass to be said, who acts in the Mass, is, of course, Jesus Christ. Therefore, we're doing what Jesus Christ did. There was a rather silly thing which was said by, I think it might have been said by somebody who is in the sympathy with Professor Dawkins, saying Catholicism is the religion for those with OCD. And that's supposed to be clever, and that's supposed it's also a bit spiteful, but it's supposed to be clever. But of course, it's very ignorant, and it's obviously the observation of somebody who sees Catholicism from the outside. I remember when I first heard it, I said, "My goodness, you've never met anybody Jewish, then, have you?" With our Jewish brethren, they are very particular. Everything must be done properly. And we Catholics, we need to bear that in mind. We believe everything must be done properly in accordance with tradition. Tradition is beautiful. Tradition is to be preserved. And let's go back to the first point. The temple was built in the teeth of opposition. We must suffer for tradition. We mustn't allow anybody, Samaritan or whoever it is, to put us off maintaining our tradition. We need to keep our tradition pure and strong, pura e dura, as they say in Italian. And therefore, we must work at it all the time. We must constantly preserve our tradition. So there ends our first step in the book of Ezra. We'll continue with this very interesting book in due course. Hope you've enjoyed hearing about it. See you soon. Bye.